With the leaky oil pan removed from Project Risky Business, our 1985 Porsche 928S, I spent the last week cleaning the oil pan and the other parts needed to be reinstalled. I'm going to take you through the cleaning of the oil pan and the reinstallation, as well as what's coming up. Stay tuned. If you've been following along in the last video, I went through what it takes to get to all 30 10mm M8 bolts on the Porsche 928s built from 78 to 95. Unfortunately, the complexity of the design requires you to remove the steering rack, the engine cross member. It's a good time to change the engine mounts. I was able to slowly remove the oil pan without moving the alternator, but I knew installing it would require me to remove the alternator. There was just no way I was going to install and retorque the bolts properly without doing that. So first up was the cleaning of the oil pan. And if you watch, I'm a big fan of using steam cleaning or my degreaser tank. Being at mid-January 2022 here in central Jersey, we got a break in the weather in the mid-40s on a sunny day. So I took advantage of that and actually used my Ryobi pressure washer for several reasons. First was the speed. Second was the fact it was a cast aluminum part. It wasn't any painted surfaces. The amount of dirt both inside and out of the pan just made sense to use my pressure washer as the quickest alternative. So as you can see at the start of this, the shallow area of the pan that's covered by the cross member was arguably the dirtiest section of the pan, and that required some degreasing. The pan was too big for my degreasing tank. This was just too big and bulky. In the background here, you can see the cross member. That was also very greasy, and I'm glad I used the pressure washer to get that cleaned up. So in this shot, you see some foam on there. That is super clean degreaser. So I let that soak in a little bit and just went to town with the pressure washer, and it made quick work of it. In some cases, I had to use a brass brush to clean it. Did not do that on the inside. Just probably about an hour spent cleaning this. And now you can see the difference, ready to go back into the engine. With that done, I moved on to removing the alternator. Porsche 928 designers, you can see they put the axis for the air conditioning compressor and the alternator on the lower section of the engine. If you've got a lift like this, it's relatively easy access. If you watch the video from last year of when I did a full service on this car, the timing belt that is, I had to remove the alternator at that point. I was dreading having to do it again because anytime you remove a part and reinstall it, there's always a risk you damage it or it won't work again, and I just didn't want to go through that. However, 1 year later and barely a couple hundred miles on the car, I noticed the alternator was again greasy and from something above it. So it just made sense to remove the alternator, give me access to the oil pan bolts, and figure out what's going on oil leak wise above it. More on that later. So in this time lapse, what you're seeing me do is remove there's a close-up of it. That's the tensioner bolt to put the belt on. I actually removed that, and there I took the belt off. So now I'm reinstalling that backwards so that it holds, for safety reasons, holds the alternator in place while I remove the upper pivot bolt. You can see it's quite a long bolt here. I get that out, and then I had to use a soft hammer that actually rides on the power steering bracket on the engine. There's two bosses on either side, and I slowly had to work my way to get that off. And here I am on the back side, removing the wiring for the alternator. So with the alternator out, the oil pan cleaned and ready to go. There was still a lot of degreasing needed to be done underneath the engine. The years of leakage, that combined with grease that was on the air conditioning compressor right next to it. I wanted to get that peripheral area clean before I started moving the oil pan into place with the fresh silicone gasket. Doing that would minimize the chance I would get grease on the gasket and potentially compromise a brand new seal. So here I am using steam now underneath the engine because I'm not removing the part. My steam cleaner works the best. It's very non-invasive, only attacks the grease underneath, and it's just a slow process of taking that grease off. You can see the miraculous. I thought the compressor was black until I really steam cleaned it, and you can see that silver bare metal. Then it was a matter of just steam cleaning the gasket flange on the engine side, just to make sure I got rid of all of the any contaminants. Once I had the block side of the oil pan gasket area cleaned off and all of that area, I was ready to put the oil pan in. As you can imagine, given the size and the number of bolts on the oil pan, you have to figure out a way to hold the gasket in place while you put the pan in place. Some people recommend using dental floss. I went ahead and just had Nurse Nancy put some zip ties in the key areas, and that did a decent job of holding the gasket in place while I put it in. So with the gasket in place there, you can see now I'm just a matter of handling it. Luckily for the size of the part, with it being cast aluminum, it's relatively light. You can see I had a bungee cord in place just in case something happened and it dropped while I was putting it in. I had some modicum of safety. It wouldn't drop on the floor and break. So here I am slowly putting in 30 of the 10 millimeter, I believe they're M8 bolts. Several people have recommended I use 928 Specialties stud kit. Unfortunately, that is on back order, so I didn't want to be sitting around with this project not knowing when I would get those. Thought about it, and I said, if I can torque everything down with this silicone gasket, I should be okay. I thought about putting a drop of Loctite on each bolt, but then when you look at it, where would I put the Loctite? I would have to put it on. I struggled with putting Loctite on the base of the bolt, sandwiched once it was hand tightened in, sandwiched between the gasket and the engine block. I didn't want to do that because I risked getting Loctite on the gasket and compromising it. And it didn't make any sense to put Loctite on the bolt underneath the pan, because if you look, the thickness of the pan, probably a third of the bolt really isn't threaded into the block. It's just through the access hole in the oil pan itself. So after a lot of self-reflection and debate with myself, I just decided I'm going to torque them down. The research indicated that 60 inch-pounds is the proper torque. So on here, it was a process of going around, and I would hand tighten each bolt. I would go around circumference. As I did that, some of the earlier ones I did, you would find the pan would go up a little bit further, so I would continue just hand tightening each one, because 60 inch-pounds is not a lot. Once I was convinced that all 30 bolts were hand tightened, or wrist tightened if you want to call it, I moved around, and unfortunately my camera died at this point. I have a small torque wrench that I use, and I went around to all the bolts I could access and did 30 inch-pounds and then moved up to 60 inch-pounds. Here I am just slowly going around to the point where it's just tight. There are about 6 bolts on the oil pan towards the front of the engine where you just cannot get a socket on it to do a torque wrench. The best thing I could do was take a ratcheting wrench of mine, feel the torque on how it felt on the bolts that were properly torqued, and then did that with the bolts I could not reach with a torque wrench. I feel I did it just right. That's tight enough, and we'll just have to see in the long term how things hold up. It's certainly going to be better than it was. I can't wait to put some oil in it. Unfortunately, in my infinite wisdom, I forgot to order a washer for the drain plug. I have a new oil filter, but not the drain plug. It's a $2.50 part, and with nothing else needed right now on to order, I went over to the local Porsche dealership and ordered 2 washers and another oil filter. So as much as I wanted to fill the engine right away, that will have to wait until Wednesday. I'm on a quest to solve all of the oil leaks on this car. It was clear from taking the alternator out after almost 1 year to the day of reinstalling it the last time that it's greasy again. In the middle there is the banjo nut on the bottom of the power steering pump. And to the right of it is the banjo nut for one of the other power steering hoses. I can't remember which one's the inlet and the outlet as I do this. The orange, the very greasy orange cables you see there, the large one is the alternator, and the small one is for the oil pressure sending unit. And then to the far right there, those are the two oil cooler lines. This particular 928 does have the oil cooler on it. It's clear to me that as you watch this now, and look at the belt there, the belt at the top is just soaked with oil. It appears to be coming through from the power steering pump. So this open cavity there is where this first one here, where those two pipes come in, those are the two oil cooling lines. A set of those is about $300, so I'm hoping that I don't have to replace those. It's good to note there that I had to take that oil pressure sending unit out. Taking that out requires a crush washer that I did order and have in stock, so I've got that. And then just below that is the oil, this is where the oil filter goes. I'll be putting that back on now that I've got the oil pan in, but that gives you a sense of how filthy and leaky this engine is. So the whole right side of the engine above the oil pan, I've noticed, I think I may have a leak on the camshaft covers, really what I most would call the valve cover, not the front cam covers. So in my last order from Porsche 928s R Us, I got a crush washer for the oil pressure sending unit, a cam cover gasket, and a power steering rebuild kit. So now that with the alternator out, the oil pan back in, my next job is to get the cross member back in and the steering rack back in, get that all put together, because I don't want to leave the car suspended from the top any more than I have to. So that'll take the next couple of days. Once I have that done and have some flexibility moving the car up and down again, I will work on rebuilding the power steering pump. So that's the latest update. Hopefully by this time next week, we'll have more progress on the car, and we'll have a new video for you. So if you're liking these videos, please press the subscribe button if you haven't, and also press the like button. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. I encourage you to check out our main website, guyswithrides.com, where you'll find daily classifieds as well as some exclusive auctions. Again, thank you for watching. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Take care.